Welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. My name's Radha Priti, and I'm here with a group of seekers reading through the Bhagavad Gita. Every Monday and Thursday, we come here and do this. We read, we discuss, we share, we open our hearts. Such a wonderful, wonderful time, and I'm so grateful to do it with all of you. And today we are in chapter 4. We're in chapter 4, and chapter 4 is titled Transcendental Knowledge. It's such a beautiful chapter, this transcendental knowledge. It's not just knowledge of the soul, the body, it's knowledge of the Supreme, right? It's knowledge of God and our relationship with Him. And Krishna's teaching us in this chapter how all of the benefits of that, how it can upgrade us, it can elevate us from out of the modes of material nature into this level of transcendence. It could get rid of all of our karma from previous lives. We can get out of that cycle of that samsara cycle of birth and death. So it's really powerful knowledge. And this word knowledge, we talked about this before, but a lot of times we hear this word knowledge, we take it to mean like information. That's kind of what it means in this day and age, information. But traditionally, knowledge referred to transformation, right? So this transcendental knowledge is knowledge of the Supreme and our relationship with Him and all of His pastimes and just all of His greatness, right? And how that can transform us. That's what we're learning here. So it's beautiful. Okay. So we'll get right into it. We're starting with text 12 today. So chapter 4, text 12. And if you want to kick us off, Mariah.
Yeah. Man in this world desires success in fruitive activities, and therefore they worship the demigods. Quickly, of course, men get results from fruitive work in this world.
Thank you. Okay, so this verse points out that people commonly approach God and spirituality for material desires, right? Like wealth, success, or personal gain. Krishna is saying that these desires should not be the ultimate goal, right? If these are the things that you desire most in life, he'll give you a route to get them and meanwhile get elevated, but they shouldn't be the know-all. He's not recommending that path. He's pointing out that these quick results from fruitive work or demigod worship, it may give immediate satisfaction, but that's temporary, right? And he's teaching us that devotion to Him, devotion to God gives eternal fulfillment. This is a concept we've gone over many times so far, but that's what this verse is saying. And when we talk about we talk about not worshiping Krishna or not worshiping God, but worshiping a higher being. If we really think about it, when we really get in tune to the way we're functioning on a day-to-day basis, in this world, we very easily can slip into like worshiping a celebrity, right? They become like the center of our lives. Right? We could do that with another being, really any higher being. Even in this earthly world, we can get into that kind of relationship, right? Whether they know it or not, maybe they do. Maybe it's a closer relationship, but we can get into this worshiping a higher being, right? For some kind of temporary satisfaction. Maybe even it's like some kind of emotional satisfaction or, this concept of looking for something other than the Supreme God to fulfill us. Right. And again, we talk a lot about why not go directly to God, right? And the answer is because you get quick results. And it's like if a child wants candy and goes to the parents and the parents say, no, you have to be good. You have to do this, this, and this, and then we'll give you some candy. So the kid says, okay, I'll just go to the candy store and get it from the person behind the counter. Because the person behind the counter will give it to me without asking any questions, right? So he can do it quickly. It's easy, right? But the parents are the actual well-wishers, right? They actually know what's best for the kid and are trying to be there for them in that way. And our relationship with God is the same. He'll give us gradually what's best for us based on what we need, right? Not just what we've paid for. If we can try to cultivate that level of surrender, he can work like that for us. We don't have to take over and decide what we need to be happy and then get in some kind of transactional relationship with a higher being to get it. It's just, and the shopkeeper doesn't really care for the child the way the parents do. In the same way, that kind of nobody really cares for us the way that God does, the way that the Supreme does. So people who are worshiping alternatives to him are seeking quick results. So while worshiping demigods can give quick results, they're temporary. Right? In Krishna, we know God as the supreme source offers eternal fulfillment. So then the question becomes, how do we engage with the world in a way that leads us to him? Right? And the Gita's teaching us that. But one of the things that Krishna teaches us that God's kind of arranged, the system that God's kind of arranged for us to gradually elevate ourselves and come to him, is this system called Varnashram. We've talked about this a little bit, but we're going to break it down a little bit more today and what it is and how it leads to our gradual elevation and keeps us, stable both materially and therefore spiritually. So 413, share my screen. I think that's Maria.
Yes. According to the three modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the four divisions of human society are created by me. And although I am the creator of this system, you should know that I am yet the non-doer, being unchangeable.
It's beautiful. These verses that we're getting into are really beautiful. So while people seek quick material results from demigod worship, God provides a deeper structure for human progress. Right? Beyond temporary gains, he's designed a system that allows individuals to align our natural tendencies with spiritual elevation. And this is called the Varnashram system. So Krishna's continuing the thread of thought that all people are on his path. Right? Wherever you are, all people are on Krishna's path, and he set up this system for us. And people are part of this social system that he's created. So the Varnashram system, it's a system that divides humans into categories according to their areas, right? According to their natural tendencies or their inclinations. Right? In Varna ashram, it's two words. So when we talk about Varn, we talk about the occupation of a person. Right? And back in the day, India was kind of known for dividing people into caste, right? Caste was determined by birth, right? That's kind of a distortion of what the Varnashram system actually is, because the Varnashram system, Varna, it's actually qualities. It's actually like your gunas, like when we talked about those modes of nature, the sattvic, the contentment, the mode of passion, the mode of ignorance. You're divided according to your qualities and your inclinations. So there's four different groups that you could be divided into according to these. We'll talk about each one of them and break them down a little bit more. But just to give you an overview, we have the Brahmanas, which is like the intellectual class. And then we have the Satriyas, which is what Arjuna is. That's like the warrior class, like the protectors. Then we have like the business orientated class. And then we have like the more service-based class, like the laborers, people who work for the other classes. Right. So when we talk about the Brahmanas, these are like the teachers, the priests, the scholars. They're people that are into learning and contemplation and wisdom. Their primary quality is goodness. That's sattva mode. They're committed to knowledge and purity. And though I should say all of these people, all of these four different categories, they still have attachments, right? And that's why we're all here, because we're all attached to something in the material world or different aspects of the material world. So these brahmanas, they're attached to wisdom and knowledge and teaching. They still have these attachments, even if you're at that highest mode. And then the next class, the Kshatriyas, the warrior class, this is what Arjuna is. They're the protectors of societies. They're the defenders of Dharma, right? Dharma being what is right. They're the rulers, the kings, right? They're all these Kshatriyas. They're courageous, right? They need to protect, they have that kind of psychology. My husband has that kind of psychology. My dog has that kind of psychology. Right? They're committed to justice and the administration of society. And as we've seen, as we talked about, these kings that do this in service to God, they can have all of these traits, all of these qualities, and they do it in service to God so that they're not doing it in service to their ego. And in that way, they're very detached and they can do their service very purely. Right? They can just, and at the end of it, they can walk away from it. It's really this beautiful thing. They have all of these qualities. They have this protector mentality. They have this, this warrior mentality, and they can engage that for the benefit of themselves, the benefit of society, ultimately service to God, right? And in that, they can become purified. They can become purified of their attachments. So for the warrior class, it could be attachment to power, authority, victory, right? They can become purified of those so that at the end, they can walk away and dedicate their lives completely to God. So it's kind of a beautiful system that God created in this way to gradually, again, keep people stable, to help people to purify their attachments and ultimately elevate themselves spiritually so that they can come back to God. So the next class, the Vaishyas, this is the business oriented people, right? They're the traders, the farmers, the merchants. They're into like wealth creation, trade, commerce, and the cultivation of the material world, right? They're all the business people. And their quality, they're very motivated by passion. They're Raja, they're very passionate. They have a lot of material ambition, entrepreneurship, right? And they're kind of a mix, though. They're kind of a mix of the mode of passion and ignorance. And I don't know if I said that for the Kshatriyas, the warrior class. They're passionate. They're in the Rajasic mode, that middle mode, right? So the Brahmanas are sattvic, the Kshatriyas are Rajasic, and then when we get down to the Vaishyas, the people that are business orientated, they're kind of a mix of that passion and ignorance, right? And they can get attached to material prosperity and success. These are their attachments. And then this last class, the Sudras, they're the laborers, the people that work for other people. They're the workers, the arts, they do the arts, and they're those who serve and support the other varnas. Okay. So they have a lot of practical skills in supporting the functioning of society. And their primary mode of nature is ignorance. Right? And they're attached to service, to routine work, to fulfilling basic duties, to pleasures, to spending money on pleasures. Right? They're the kind of the lowest mode. So these are the 4 characteristics of people across human society. And God again established this system so that we can deal with our attachments and be stable as we purify them or uproot them in a gentle way. All right, it's not meant to create rigid divisions between people. That's not the intention. It's to help people gradually rise above their material attachments. So it's saying, okay, recognize you're still attached. You have a certain mode, a certain way that you operate. Let's get you in a situation where you're working, congruently with that so that you can become purified and come to these levels of realizations. Kind of start to be brushed up against a little bit in the material world, right? Get some of that friction going so that we can really see and evaluate our attachments and hopefully shed them, right? Because it's due to these attachments that we all miss the very purpose that all of these things exist, which is to please God, right? And this system is here because we desire it. This material world is here because we desire it. Just like in 4:11, we talked about this verse right before this one, or I guess 2 verses ago. It says that God reciprocates according to our desires. So we're attached, right? We're attached and we desire things in the material world. So God created this entire existence to fulfill our desires, right? We want to be little mini controllers. So God said, okay, here's your opportunity, Is this what you want? This is what I'll create for you. So the idea in this Varna is that if our occupation is matched with our natural talents and abilities, there's both maximum individual satisfaction and also maximum social contribution. So when we talk about that individual satisfaction, if you remember in the 3rd chapter, that verse about doing your own duty is more important. Doing your own duty imperfectly is more important than doing somebody else's perfectly. Or maybe it's just doing your own duty is more important than doing somebody else's perfectly. Anyway, the point being that we should engage in our activities suited to our abilities and inclinations rather than get bound by societal labels or what we think we should do or comparing ourselves to others, right? Whatever our natural inclinations are, whatever we just like or are good at, right? We should pursue those things, but we should do it in a way that we can serve God. And that's why he's created this whole system so that everybody can be elevated while they're still kind of honoring their unique makeup. Because we need that, right? We can't just kind of repress who we are or who we aren't in the name of being who we think we should be. We have to be where we are. And God's so merciful that he'll meet us wherever we are. And that's why he's created this whole system. Right. And when we talk about the maximum social contribution, this is kind of cool too, the way that it's all created, because like the Brahmanas are compared, if we look at like a body and how a body all functions together, right? The Brahmanas are compared to the head, to a person's head. The Kshatriyas are the arms, the Vaishyas are the bellies, and the Sudras are the legs. Right. So the point is that society is like a body and is functioning together, like a body. It requires all of these parts, and all of these parts work together harmoniously. And that's kind of the way that society is built when it has these different categories and these different people in these different categories. It helps society function harmoniously. Now, one thing about the Varnas is it can be used to convey hierarchical control, the hierarchy, right? Like when we say like the head is the highest and the legs are the lowest. So who would want to be the legs, right? Everybody wants to be the head, right? But we should understand that the point of division, it's not meant for domination, but cooperation. So in one sense, okay, the Brahmanas are higher considered, and the Sudras are considered lower, right? Like if you have higher karma, you'll come as a Brahmana. If you have lower karma, you'll come as a Sudra. So that there is some kind of hierarchical component on a material level. But even the point of the hierarchy is cooperation. And when we talk about it on a spiritual level, there's equal opportunity for devotional growth wherever you are. So on a spiritual level, it's horizontal, right? Wherever you are, there's equal opportunities for spiritual growth, right? The only point of having people in different places is, again, so that it can be tailored to people's natural inclinations, because we know that's what we all need psychologically to really feel happiness in the moment, to really just kind of even be stable. And then also society needs, different skills, different people, different to function. So when we look at the material level, the hierarchy, when we look at different people's skill sets, inequality, it's really just a fact of life. We've talked about this before on the material level. Like some people are going to be more athletic. Some people are going to be more intelligent. There's going to be different levels of skill sets for different people. There's going to be that inequality on the material level. We'll never all be equal on the material level, right? But what we do have, and we talked about this in chapter 2, if you remember, at the spiritual level, we're all equal. So that need that we all feel inside to be equal, that's fair. That's a fair, and it's real, but it comes from the soul, right? The soul's knowing that we are all equal. According to who we actually are, we are all equal, right? We're all souls and we're all equally parts of the divine, and the soul has no varna, right? This designation, it doesn't apply to the soul. It's just designed for social organization, or it's not even designed for social organization, but for spiritual elevation, right? By engaging in our duties according to our natures as an offering to God, we can transcend material attachments and progress towards liberation. And that's why it's even here. So that's the Varna. So then when we talk about Varnashram system, when we talk about the ashram orientation of a person, the ashram orientation is much to do with like the stage of life that a person's in. So when they're younger, when they're like 5 to 25, they're a student, they're practicing like celibacy, they're learning all of these things, right? All of this spiritual knowledge. That's what they're doing up until they're about 25. And then when they're 25, they get married, they become a householder. Right? And they have that life. They create an ashram within their own house. They get married, they have kids. And when I say ashram, that means that it's kind of centered around God, right? Their lives are centered around God, and they're just doing it together as a family unit. And then they retire. When they're 50 years old, they retire until they're about 75. And this is where, a lot of times married couples, the kids will grow up, they'll move out, and the married couples will kind of, they'll some don't even live together. They'll kind of start really getting more serious about their spiritual life and committing more of their time and their energy and their consciousness to that. And then when they're, over 75, they renounce. They become sannyasis. They renounce completely their attachments. And this was just the traditional way that society in India was organized according to these stages so that people could engage themselves. Right? With the idea being that as you get older, and you go through all of these things, you become a householder, you become responsible for these people, your attachments, you have lots of attachments, but you kind of gradually become purified as you get older. And hopefully more renounced and more ready for the idea of renunciation as you're going through all of these experiences and all of these things in life that are kind of pruning you for that. They're kind of ruffling your feathers. You're kind of getting to that point where you're getting these realizations, right? Ideally, because from a young age you were trained, with all of this knowledge, and then you were thrown out into the world and said, okay, find a spouse, get married, try it on. You really have an opportunity to like get out there and get brushed up against a little bit by the material world. But you're equipped with all of this knowledge so that you can kind of understand and see what's happening through the lens of that, which is a beautiful thing. And then you have these experiences that hopefully lead to some realizations that make you become a little bit more detached. And that's where you get to this age of retirement. And retirement, it's not spent like, sitting on the couch watching TV. Retirement is spent very intentionally, very consciously, again, trying to use the time that you have, because you have hopefully more time when you're retired, when the kids move out, maybe you're not working, to commit to your spiritual life. And in that, you're preparing for the inevitable, which is everything to be taken away from you. Right? And so that before that time even comes, you reach that level of detachment internally where you can walk away from it, no problem. And that's what these different stages of life are really intended for, really set up for. And this is the way that it was set up in India to facilitate this for people. Right? And we'll talk about it more in the 18th chapter, but that's kind of the Varnashram, the system that God created so that we can all be situated wherever we are and we can grow spiritually and be stable materially. And if you remember back in the 3rd chapter when we talked about the different layers of attachment, the different levels of attachment, we talked about the 4 categories, right? People like plants, they're stationary, they don't do anything or have any karma, but they're like, they have the thickest covering, right? When we talked about that lust, the thickest covering, we talked about like a child being covered by a womb, right? And then the next level, we have the animals, right? Those who are moved only by impulses, right? And then the next level is those who are moved by ethics and impulses, right? That's us humans. We can correct mistakes. And then the highest level is the devatas, right? They rarely make mistakes, and they're alert to their mistakes, and they're quick to forgive and rectify, right? So those are like the four categories of people. So if based on how rooted we are in our attachments, like we talked about in the last chapter, you'll take different births accordingly. So if you're really, really attached, then you may come back with that really thick covering of lust, like we talked about, as a plant. Or if you're not, if you're a little less detached or attached than that, then maybe an animal. And that was the dust on the mirror, remember. If you're working on these things, and you're cultivating detachment, then maybe you get a birth as a human. Excuse me. And that's that thinnest layer, right? That smoke covering the fire. Right. So something that was kind of cool that I read in this book, we can think of all these three different things as like three different dimensions, right? Like, excuse me, sorry, my throat is like still recovering. Okay, so the x-axis being the social divisions, like what we talked about, the varnas. The y-axis being the conscious beings, what we just talked about, depending on your level of attachment, right, is where you are in the y-axis. And then the z-axis is the different spiritual stages of life, right? So when you're a student, when you're a householder, when you're retired. And this is different stages based on one's inclinations, attachments, and age have been created by the Lord to facilitate this gradual progress in consciousness. So that's just kind of like a visual if we want to think about it in the three different dimensions, depending on your social division, which is largely dependent on your mode, where you are sattva, where you're on your guna. If you're sattva, you're content, you're passionate, you're ignorant, right? And we know that as you go from ignorance to contentment, your consciousness is increasing, right? Your consciousness is expanding, rather. And then we talked about the conscious beings, right? That's dependent on how attached you are, your covering of lust that you have. So a plant is the most covered, a demigod is the least covered, right? And so as you go up, your consciousness is expanding according to that. And then the spiritual stages of life, right? Again, ideally you're going from from a student to a sannyasi, and your consciousness is expanding. You're becoming less detached and more attached to God. So we can kind of think of that visual, and this is the system that God's created for us to facilitate this progress in consciousness. It's kind of amazing. It's really genius. So also in this verse, Krishna's saying that, oh, Leonie, I didn't notice. Yes, you just raised your hand. Please share.
Yes, because I think this is so beautiful. Think about it, how we all need each other. What it's saying, of course, like we all need each other to reach the higher goal. So we're not alone. And to see that that we need each other, we can also see the value of each other. That's what I think about when you talk about this. So I really like it.
Ah, that's so beautiful. I love that. And it's so true, you know, and we get so stuck in our material consciousness that we get to be competitive and we get to comparing ourselves to others. But if we could all really see that we're all going towards the same ultimate goal, and if we could really assist each other in doing that from a place of love and compassion and non-comparison, we could drop that kind of material consciousness and not focus on it so much, but instead we get so trapped in this system that we forget the whole point of it, even, right? The whole point of it is to connect with God, but we are so trapped in it and our vision is so small that we're just trying to be little mini controllers and rulers, and in that we don't get anywhere that we're supposed to be, right? We get kind of stuck in it like a matrix. So that's really beautiful. Love that. Thank you for sharing that. Does anybody else want to share before we go to the second part of the verse? because we just talked about Varnashram and the system that Krishna's created for us. Now we're going to talk about how he's the non-doer. But does anybody want to share before we go there? Okay, so that's the second part of this verse. He says, you should know that I am yet the non-doer, being unchangeable. So he says, in this verse, I'll just kind of reiterate, according to the three modes of material nature and the work associated with them, the four divisions of human society are created by me. So we really kind of just broke that all down. And then he says, although I am the creator of this system, so he's saying, I created this, you should know that I'm yet the non-doer, being unchangeable. Right? So what does this mean? He's the non-doer. It means that there's natural human talents and abilities. And when a person is born, they come with that person, right? So therefore, they are created by God in that way. But he's not the doer, right? So if we consider like the four varnas, the four occupations we talked about, the brahmanas, the satriyas, the vaishyas, the sudras, there are four different lanes of life, right? And they're all going the same direction towards liberation, right? They're parallel lanes. People's karma places them on the lanes, right? That's how you get assigned to the lane that you're in. Krishna doesn't get entangled in that. He's not being partial, right? All the lanes are meant for people's spiritual growth. It is Krishna who created the lanes, right? But their karma is placing them there. So God created the whole system, but he doesn't get involved with it. You know, it's like a government has to have rules of a society for it to function properly. And everybody and government's very transparent about what those rules are. You know, they're not keeping up from anybody. In fact, they want people to understand what the rules are. But wherever people are, whatever people do, you know, wherever people end up in that, you know, if people end up in jail, it's their decisions that brought them there. You know, they knew that if they did this, this, and this, that was going to put them in jail. So in that way, God creates the system, but he's not partial. He doesn't come and you know, interfere. You know, when he comes to the world, he follows the prescribed duties of Varnashram to set an example. So when he comes here, he follows the system that he's talked about, right? Except that he's already transcended the system. Right. And so therefore, he doesn't need it to elevate him. He's already transcendental to the entire system. But yet when he comes, he follows his prescribed duties. Just like he talked about again in chapter 3, like what was it, 22 through 24. He talked about how him is an example. You know, he does his duty to set an example. Right. But in this way, he's both the non-doer and unchangeable. Because even though he's in the system, he looks like he's following this system. He's not transformed by it because he's already transcendental to it. So therefore, in that way, he's unchangeable. Right? He awards neither results nor reactions. And he's not contaminated or transferred. He's completely out of it, you know. And therefore, we must take responsibility for everything that happens to us. Right? God only sanctions it, right? Against even his own desires. You know, his desire is that we come back to him. But because of our rebellious activities and their results, you know, that are products of our expression of our own free will, because that's the whole point. You know, we have this free will so that we can turn back to him, because that's even what love is, right? Without that, there wouldn't even be love. Right? We have that this happens to us, right? And God's just waiting for us to turn back to him. And for those that don't turn back to him, they're subject to the laws of material nature and get the results of their good and bad deeds accordingly. Right? When in actuality, we desire to act, God in the heart sanctions it, and material nature facilitates it. Right? Though the weight of responsibility for the action rests solely on us. So because we have that free will, it's the inclination to act that comes from us. Even though God sanctions it in the heart, but God sanctions it because he gives us this free will, because he loves us, right? And material nature facilitates it because he's created this for us, this system for us, this matrix for us to hopefully figure it out. Whether we do or not, it's our choice. Right? And so the weight of the responsibility for the action, it rests on us. And this is the universal system. God's created this system as pathways for us all to grow in our spiritual journeys and to function harmoniously together, like Leonie said, on a material level. And it's not meant for rigid social hierarchy, but for cooperation and spiritual evolution. So Krishna creates this structure. Yet again, he himself is beyond it, like we talked about. He's unaffected from it. He's not contaminated by it. He's not transformed by it. He's not the doer. He's only acting in it to set an example for us, as like he instructed us to do in the last chapter. So this raises a question. If Krishna creates the system of action, does he himself act? And if so, does he accumulate karma like we do? And so that's what he's going to answer in the next verse. So we'll move on to the next verse unless anybody wants to share anything. Okay. Please read. I think this was Lakshmi. Oh, I just saw Lakshmi's not on right now. Maria, do you want to read this one?
There is no work that affects me, nor do I aspire for the fruits of action. One who understands this truth about me also does not become entangled in the fruitive reactions of work.
You're on mute, Rhoda.
Thank you. Okay, so 4:14. It's building on 4:13 from the last verse, where Krishna explains how he created the Varn system, yet he remains unattached. Right? He now is extending this idea, emphasizing that although he acts in this world, he's never bound by karma like we are. Right? Because unlike us who are driven by desires and reactions, Krishna's actions are purely transcendental. This is similar to the theme in the 3rd chapter, again, where he said he has no duties. He has no duties, yet he acts. Right? His action is not entangled. It's not motivated by desire. He's saying that if you understand this position, that people will become free. If you understand this position, you'll become free from karma. Like you'll become free from the bondage. If we remember in 4:9, a few verses ago, he says kind of a similar thing, where he says that if you understand his activities, you'll come to him. Remember we talked about that? This is kind of similar, except that 4:9 was more about bhakti yoga, and this one, 4:14, is more about karma yoga because it's talking about bondage, where 4:9 was saying if you understand his activities, you'll come to him. That's more like bhakti yoga, and this is more like if you understand his activities, you'll get out of this system, you'll get free from the bondage. It's more like karma yoga, which is the topic of this section, chapters 1 through 6, right? Okay, so here he's talking about freedom from bondage. There he was talking about attaining him. But either way, the key point is that he's talking about the power of knowing him and knowing his position. Again, this transcendental knowledge, the title of this entire chapter, Krishna is teaching us the power of this transcendental knowledge, the power of knowing him, right? Of knowing his activities, of knowing his positions, what that can do for us in our lives, right? Because it's like, why would God act at all, right? We seek relationships. When we think about our motivation for relationships, we feel a sense of incompleteness, and we hope that someone else will give us a sense of completeness, right? That's why we seek relationships. But we should understand that God is complete, right? He's 100% complete. So why would he seek relationships? If our actions are to seek completeness, God's actions are to share completeness, right? Like if we were really hungry, we lived in like a neighborhood, we were hungry, we look for someone who can invite us over for dinner, right? But say the opposite is true. Say we have so much food that we're looking for someone to share it with, right? Both people are coming out of the house looking for someone, but the reasons are very different. So when Krishna seeks relationships, he's not seeking anything material from us. And that's why he doesn't come under material karma. And if you understand this pure spiritual motive of God's actions, we also can stay free from bondage. If we just understand this about Krishna and his activities. His actions are not for his own benefit, but are performed for the purpose of guiding others on the right path. And he's not bound by the laws of nature like us. He doesn't go through birth, growth, decay, death. Remember, we learned in chapter 2, all of those transitions that we go through. He's transcendental to all of that. His actions are selfless and to serve the greater good. If we really, really think about this, it's almost even hard to conceive because we're so stuck in our material mindset, our material consciousness, that even when we think we're selfish or selfless, we're probably not 100%, you know? So it's like, but this is this is a being who's completely selfless. He's really just serving that greater good. He doesn't need anything. He doesn't need validation, not a pat on the back, not a friend. He's complete in himself. And this is such a good lesson for us because, again, our actions are so often motivated by selfish desires. But a spiritually evolved person acts without selfishness or personal attachment. And this is such a high standard for us. And it's not something we can just say, oh, okay, I need to be more selfless. And then you can just do overnight, right? Maybe you can try to do things that are more selfless. But in terms of like changing that inner heart, that heart transformation, it's not something that just happens overnight, right? It takes time. It takes time. But what we're seeing here is this gold standard for us, right? And we're seeing this North Star of where we're trying to get to. And the Gita is teaching us the process to get there. And Varnashram is a perfect example of the system to get there. And maybe our society isn't situated that same way, that it's so practical for us, but we can, at the same time, we can kind of take the principles from it, right? Which is like work in accordance with your natural inclinations. Give the results to God, right? We try to create some kind of stable material environment for us, right? So that we can be stable, we can have a contribution to society, and our basic needs are taken care of such that we can commit a certain level of our consciousness to connecting with God, right? That's what we're trying to do. If our lives are so unstable and we don't even have our basic needs, how are we even going to be able to sit and contemplate these things? If it's like, I can't even feed my family, or, I'm so, it's all the things that we deal with, that agitate us either emotionally or physically, right? We have to get to a place where our material situation is stable enough so that we can have a steady sadhana. You're not going to be waking up at 5 a.m. to have a couple hours sadhana when you're working 4 jobs and taking care of, 6 kids. And it's like, we got to have some kind of stability. That's why we have this varnashram system. That's why even in the householder life, you have a partner, and it's to make this stable for us. And in this day and age, we know there's multiple ways to do that and to get there. And that's all for us to assess for ourselves, and hopefully have a teacher to help you. But that's the ultimate goal, right? We want to get to some level of material stability so that we can contemplate these higher truths. And this is the gold standard. It's saying we want to get to that place where we can be selfless. And if you follow these processes, you can get there. Don't fool yourself into thinking that, okay, great, I know this now, I'll just be selfless. No, it's a real transformation of the heart, and it takes time. It takes a level of detachment from material things and attachment to God, ultimately, to get to this pure level of selflessness. but we can do it. God can get us there. By God's mercy, we can get there if we just stay course, right? And be honest about where we are and try to apply these principles to our lives. So Krishna's actions show us how to live and act in alignment with Dharma, right? Doing the right thing. And they teach us about detachment. He shows us, again, by example, that one can live in the material world without being entangled by it. So we too can be in this matrix without being affected by it, right? We have this knowledge. We, hopefully can set our lives up such that we can experience some of these things, glimpses into it, so that we can grow, right? He demonstrates the path that if we act according to our duties without attachment to the results, he demonstrates that path, right? He demonstrates that is the path. And his activities are transcendental. They're beyond the influence of the three modes. His actions are driven by divine will, not by material desires that govern most of us. And this shows us that when someone engages in these spiritual practices with the right understanding, their activities can also become transcendental. That's the whole point of this transcendental knowledge. Well, that's what he's telling us this transcendental knowledge can do for us. It can help us to rise above these material influences. And we do that by connecting with source, by connecting with divine, something so much more complete and powerful than we can really imagine. And just our tether to that can keep us from getting too roughed around by all the little waves of material existence. And that's the power of this transcendental knowledge. And if we understand his example, we can learn to act without creating further karma, right? By performing actions as a service to God without attachment to the outcomes, we can transcend the effects of karma. Right? So Krishna acts, but unlike us, he's not entangled. This is the key to karma yoga. The key to this whole section, when I say section, I mean the first 6 chapters of the Gita are about karma yoga. So this is the key, acting without attachment. And he's not the first to show this, right? He's in the next verse, he'll remind Arjuna that many great souls in the past have followed this understanding and attained liberation. So this is, and that's where we're going, actually. This will be the last verse that we do. And Lakshmi, do you want to read for us 15?
Sure. All the liberated souls in ancient times acted with this understanding of my transcendental nature. Therefore, you should perform. Oops.
Oh, sorry. That was my fault. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No problem. Therefore, you should perform your duty following in their footsteps.
Very nice. Okay, so this is the last verse of this section. He's concluding the section here. The section began, we remember, way back in the 4th verse, where Arjuna asked Krishna how he got this knowledge, how he had given this knowledge to the sun god. Because again, if we remember, the sun god was like 220 million years ago. We know that Krishna was, is not that old. Well, he knows how long a human, life is. So he's just kind of trying to put it together. And Krishna's answer to that question is explaining that his position is divine, right? And that if people understand that position, they'll gain liberation. And that past knowers of Krishna's position acted and became liberated. And Arjuna is being asked to follow in their footsteps. So if we zoom in a little bit more to what's happening here, well, just to kind of review this section really quickly. In 4.7 to 4.8, if we remember, Krishna explains that he came here to establish Dharma, social and spiritual order, right? He says, like, when there's a decline in Dharma and an increase in adharma, I come and I help set things back in order, right? And then in 4.11, he talked about how he reciprocates with everyone accordingly. And then he talked about how it helps them live according to social order created by this varnashram system. Meanwhile, Krishna and Arjuna are on a battlefield, and he's a Satriya. Therefore, his duty is to fight. And Krishna wants him to fight in knowledge of him and as an offering to him. And Krishna is never motivated by selfish desire or bound by karma. We just heard that in the last verse. And in the past, great souls understood Krishna's nature. So he's saying people have done this before and did their duty as a service to him and attained liberation. So if Arjuna just follows their example, he'll get liberated, right? All of that is how Krishna answers this question. And he could have got lost in like self-glorification, using it as, but instead he uses it as an opportunity to guide Arjuna. Right? Because he's talking about his infinite glories. He has infinite glories. I mean, the whole thing could just be that, but really he's just using that as an opportunity to guide Arjuna. And it's funny to think too, like Krishna has infinite glories, and the way that, when he's asked this question, he could have really just spoke to those exclusively forever. But he uses it as an opportunity to help Arjuna. In the meantime, we have so few glories, but yet we can't wait to take an opportunity to glorify ourselves, right? In our smallness, in our incompleteness. So that's another kind of lesson, kind of thing we can learn from Krishna here. He's just such an example for us. And that's what he comes here to do, which again just demonstrates how merciful he is, because he doesn't need anything from us or this system that he's created. It's all for us. So we learn here to follow the example of the wise, right? Just as the sages acted selflessly, we should also try to focus on performing our duties with devotion, offering them to a higher purpose, and without personal attachment, right? Let's start there. Let's just start there. And then we can maybe develop some selflessness in our action, right? By not being attached to the results, success or failure, we can become free, right? We can become free from our anxiety and our mental disturbances, and therefore progress spiritually. And that's the purpose of this whole varnashram system that Krishna's created for us. And that's what he's waiting for. That's what he wants from each and every one of us, is for us to realize that and turn to him. So that's all that I had today. Mariah, do you want to kick us off with any reflections?
Yeah. It's so funny. Last night, me and Luna watched this movie called Raya, the Last Dragon. And I don't know if anyone's watched this Disney movie, but it basically describes like how there's this perfect system in play, but the moment that we start to put our material consciousness onto it and become greedy and human discord where we're fighting and competing, the whole thing falls apart and everybody like isolates into their own category, where it's like, the legs are fighting with the arms, and the belly and the head are all fighting. But in this movie, they see the world as like a dragon. And so like there's talon, there's fang, there's tail, there's heart, there's spine, and they're all separated. And, the leaders of the heart tribe, they want everyone to come back together and like work together again. But then when they invite them, it turns into like everyone's greed takes over and they all turn into like fighting each other. But then at the end of it, their higher power that they surrender to ultimately is like dragons and having dragons back in the world. And they eventually do like work it out and they come back together. But it was like learning to develop that heart and that trust and see that each category has its place, and how to work harmoniously will bring harmony. And that's really what this varnashram system is. It's like a way to bring harmony into the world and peace into the world, and understand like it's not about being better than each other. It's just about like, acknowledging each other's good qualities and enhancing them and seeing how it can all work together for a whole. But another aspect is like, it has to come from the heart. It can't be from this materialistic point of view. And so it's just funny how I just watched that movie last night and it just lines up perfectly with all of this. Like, I love how Krishna does that. He's like reinforcing these things. But so yeah, that was my reflection. Just like, we can see it in anywhere. We call it Varnashram Dharma in our culture, but you can see all these other cultures, they had a similar idea. It's like, even that movie, I'm sure it's created off of some culture, in that tradition where everyone wants this harmony, but it's like it takes each individual person working on themselves, going into their heart, cleansing their material ideas of like greed and competition and hoarding and anger, all those things. So yeah, that's all.
Wow. That's so beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. I want to see that movie now. What's that movie called?
Raya the Last Dragon. It's on Disney.
Wow.
It came out like, I don't know, a couple years ago. Luna was a baby when it was first came out, I think. And now she loves
Huh.
it, but it's really good if you watch it. It's fun.
So cool. Yeah. And such a testament to these principles. And that's really, again, just like you said so eloquently, what we want to take from this, is that we need to be properly situated materially with a contribution to society, with, our varnashram, whatever that is, however that looks, so that we can ultimately give it all to God, so that we can even connect to God, so that we can be stable and stable enough to commit resources to that. So
Yeah, it's like about finding your own inner duty, your own inner occupation, dharma, and then being secure in that, so then you can see others and you can see they're secure in theirs, so that you guys can work together, like, so yeah.
yes. And the problem happens when we lose sight of that ultimate goal, which is not for us to, prove our own worth and our own, but it's to give it all to God. And then,
Yeah.
but we become so trapped. Yeah. Thank you. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Trevor.
Beautiful class as always. Thank you for having it and whatnot. Very grateful for the association and the opportunity to give and receive love in the form of information and whatnot and wisdom. Forgive me if you hear Mickey in the background. I'm in my room with my son. But I had a humorous and fascinating image in my head whenever we got to the quote about don't don't uh don't think of me as the doer. um is basically like I thought of Krishna like creating this school, with the playground area and all these activities to engage in, different levels of knowledge to partake in. And he's like, all right, with my own energy, I created this place for you, and just whenever you scuff yourself up on the monkey bars, don't be blaming me for that stuff. Like I'll show up and fix your situation when you call me, and even I'll repair your school and your uh, playground and even you. But don't blame me for scuffing yourself up and ruining the school. So it was just kind of funny image I had in my head, you know. But yeah, he's so merciful that he even like takes part in it and plays as a tutor while you're in that school. He'll even sit in the classroom with you, blend in with you, and show us how to do it and whatnot, and go and play with us too in the playground.
So true.
It was pretty cool image I had in my head when we were talking about that stuff.
Oh, thank you for sharing.
The Varnashram system is also a very beautiful scientific layout, like, and you can see in today's world like what happens when it's not present, and
Yeah.
people are like running around engaging in things that aren't for them. So many people are having such a hard time finding their purpose in life, and that Varnashram system was created so that you can simply engage in this material world and still be able to achieve the ultimate goal. Like you said, gradually we want to be able to get there, but not in an aggressive way. We want to be able to serve each other like a family, and by serving each other, we're serving God too, because that's the whole aim of the entire system.
Right.
But yeah, and
So
I
nice.
also like how it's to help encourage you to not think you have to give everything up and run into the forest and live there. It's so that you can creatively morph your material situation into your sadhana.
Yeah, exactly. And not even, it's even recommending that, it's even saying, hey, if you do run off to the forest, that's not true renunciation. It has to happen gradually. It takes a change of heart. And this is really the system to do it, the way to do it progressively in a healthy and real way.
Yeah, and how it echoes into the households. That's also a beautiful thing too.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Kalpana, do you want to share anything before we go today?
Just one thing. Trevor and everybody did say everything about the Varnashram and about the detachment. How important it is, at least at that stage of life, because like you said, you have to give up everything anyways at the end of your life. So start detaching instead of, getting entangled into grandkids and more great grandkids, and that okay, you don't have to go to the forest, but at least not to get entangled into these relationships. That was a nice point. And I like the way you discussed about the x-axis and the y-axis.
That was a cool visualization, wasn't it? I hadn't seen that before. I was reading that in this Chowpatty Monk's book. I forgot his name already, but I was like, whoa, that just really brings it out. I think of that kind of expanding and expanding like a sphere,
Beautiful. Thank you. Cool. Thank you so much for, you're not feeling well and yet you're conducting the classes. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for being tolerant of me and my coughing, and thank you. Okay. Anybody else before we end for the day? Okay. Thank you all.
Radha.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Maraya. And